You know, just when you think you have seen it all, just when you think the dust has finally settled on the crazy, chaotic history of Kiss, here we go again. It is January 2026, and let me tell you, the Catman and the Demon are back at each other's throats. It is honestly unbelievable. But look, this isn't about the makeup anymore. It's not about who wore the platform boots better, and it is definitely not about another end-of-the-road reunion tour. This is deeper than that. This is about history, it's about ownership, and it is about the single biggest hit this band ever produced. So here is the deal. In a blistering new interview that just dropped this month, Gene Simmons decided to wake up and choose violence. He publicly claimed that original drummer Peter Criss had, quote, nothing to do with writing the song Beth. Yeah, you heard that right. Gene actually went a step further, basically saying that because Peter was the drummer, he contributed absolutely no musical or copyrightable elements to the track whatsoever. It is a harsh take, right? Well, obviously Peter Criss was not going to take that lying down. He immediately fired back, talking to stations like Q104.3 and AudioFix. Peter called Gene's remarks ridiculous, very uncalled for, and frankly, he accused Gene of trying to rewrite history about a recording session that, get this, Gene wasn't even present for. For 50 years, Beth has been the crown jewel of Peter Criss's career. It is his baby. And now, in 2026, Gene Simmons wants to strip that title away. So, who is actually telling the truth here? To really understand this explosion, we have to peel back the layers and go all the way back to the beginning. Welcome back, everyone. I am so glad you are here, because today we are going to dissect one of rock and roll's most bitter, confusing, and enduring disputes. The song is Beth. The players, you know them. Peter Criss, the gravel-voiced drummer with that street-smart R&B soul, and Gene Simmons, the marketing genius who protects the Kiss brand like a guard dog. Now think about the fundamental irony here. It is actually kind of funny when you stop to think about it. Kiss was built on hard rock, fire-breathing, blood-spitting, and comic book theatrics. They were the knights in Satan's service, right? They were the boogeymen of the 70s. And yet, what was their highest charting single in the United States? What was the song that reached number 7 on the Billboard Hot 100 and won a People's Choice Award? It wasn't Rock and Roll All Night. It wasn't Detroit Rock City. It was a soft, tear-jerking orchestral ballad sung by the drummer. For decades, the story we have all been told was pretty simple. Peter wrote a song for his wife. The band hated it. They fought about it, but it became a smash hit anyway. That is the classic David and Goliath story we all love. But come on, we know the music business is never that clean. The reality of songwriting credits, especially back in the Shark Tank of the 1970s, is rarely that black and white. So, to keep us on track, we are going to use the ABT method and but, therefore, to really break this down properly. Here is the setup. Kiss was at their absolute peak in 1976, and Beth became their unlikely savior, skyrocketing their fame. But Gene Simmons has harbored a 50-year resentment over the song's success and is now, in 2026, claiming Peter was merely a passenger on his own hit. Therefore, Peter is fighting back to save his legacy and prove he is the real deal. Let's look at the evidence, let's dig into the production logs, and let's analyze these wild new 2026 statements to see who actually wrote the song that defined a generation. Okay, so to understand why Peter Criss is calling Gene's 2026 comments ridiculous, we have to look at the timeline. You can't just look at the finished product, you have to look at the seeds. Gene's primary argument basically boils down to, he is a drummer, drummers hit things, they don't write melodies. But the history of this song starts way before Peter ever met Gene Simmons or Paul Stanley. We need to hop in a time machine and travel back to the late 1960s. Imagine a young Peter Criss, no cat makeup, just a hungry musician in New York. He was playing in a band called Chelsea. His bandmate was a guitarist named Stan Penridge. Now, if you take nothing else away from this video, remember the name Stan Penridge, because legally speaking, Stan is the primary co-writer of the original concept. So, picture the scene. They are in a sweaty rehearsal room trying to jam, trying to make it big. And there is this other band member, right? His name is Mike Brand. And Mike has a wife named Becky. And Becky? Well, Becky was not a fan of the rock and roll lifestyle. She would constantly call the studio, interrupting their jam sessions, nagging Mike, asking when he was coming home for dinner. It became a running joke. It was annoying as hell, so Peter and Stan, being the smartasses they were, started jamming on a little ditty mocking the situation. They were basically trolling their bandmate. The original lyrics weren't, "Beth, I hear you calling." They were, "Beck, I hear you calling." Now, according to Peter's consistent testimony over the last 5 decades, and he has not really changed his story, he devised the melody. He was humming the tune. He helped shape that verse-chorus structure while Penridge worked on the lyrics. This was a collaborative effort between 2 musicians in a completely different band. This is the crucial point where Gene's argument starts to fall apart. Gene is out there saying, Peter had nothing to do with the writing. But guys, the song existed. It was there in a raw form years before Kiss was even a thought in Gene's head. If Peter Criss didn't write it, and Gene Simmons certainly didn't write it, and it was brought into the Kiss camp by Peter Criss, well, the logic of Gene's argument begins to wobble, doesn't it? Peter's rebuttal in his recent interview emphasizes this exact point. He basically said, "Gene, you weren't there." And he is right. Gene Simmons was likely still in college or playing in his old band Wicked Lester when Peter and Stan were goofing around with the chords for Beck. When Peter finally joined Kiss, he brought this fragment of a song with him in his back pocket. For the first few albums, Kiss was strictly a heavy rock outfit. A ballad? No way, it didn't fit. But by 1976, the band was preparing to record the album Destroyer. They were trying to push the envelope, so Peter took a shot and presented the song again. This is where things get interesting. Enter Bob Ezrin. If Stan Penridge is the grandfather of the song, Bob Ezrin is the surgeon who saved its life. Ezrin was a heavyweight producer. He had worked with Alice Cooper. He understood theatrics, but more importantly, he understood music theory. When Peter played Beck for Ezrin, the producer heard a hit, but he knew it needed work. The original version was a bit jauntier, almost like a country rock track. It had a little bounce to it. Ezrin didn't want bounce. He wanted heartbreak. He wanted a ballad that would make teenagers cry in their bedrooms. This is where the songwriting credit discussion gets complicated. And honestly, this is where Gene's recent argument finds a tiny, tiny sliver of technical ground, though I don't think it justifies the insults. Ezrin and Peter Criss got to work. They changed the title from Beck to Beth, partly to avoid confusion with Jeff Beck, and partly because Beth just sounded softer, sweeter. Ezrin is credited as a writer on the song alongside Criss and Penridge. Here is the scene that Peter Criss describes in his defense, and it is a powerful image. It is just him and Bob Ezrin sitting at the piano. They worked on the phrasing. They slowed the tempo way down. And most importantly, Bob Ezrin brought in the New York Philharmonic to record that lush orchestration. That is what gives the song its emotional weight. But here is the kicker, and listen closely to this. During the recording of Beth, neither Gene Simmons nor Paul Stanley were required in the studio. In fact, they weren't even there. There is no bass guitar on the track. There is no rhythm guitar. It is Peter's voice, a piano, and an orchestra. Peter's recent pushback highlights this isolation. He is basically asking, how can you tell me I didn't write the song when you weren't even in the room? He accuses Gene of talking about things he doesn't know about, because Gene was physically absent during the song's transformation. It is a fair point, right? How can you claim someone contributed no musical elements if you were off grabbing lunch or recording vocals for a different song while the magic was happening? Bob Ezrin has historically supported Peter's version of events. While Ezrin certainly elevated the song, he wrote that beautiful piano arrangement, he has always acknowledged that Peter brought him the song and the melody. The core identity, the soul of the track, came from the drummer. So we have a song written by Peter and Stan, polished by Bob, and performed by Peter. Gene Simmons is nowhere to be found in this equation. To really understand the venom behind Gene's comments, we have to look at the scoreboard. We have to look at the numbers. When Destroyer was released, the lead single was supposed to be Detroit Rock City. That was the anthem. That was Paul Stanley's masterpiece. It opens with the sound of a car crash. It is heavy. It is epic. Beth? Beth was thrown onto the B-side. And for those of you too young to remember vinyl, the B-side was basically the trash can. It was the throwaway track you put there just to fill space. But then a happy accident occurred, a total fluke. A woman named Rosalie Tremblay, who was a music director at a radio station in Windsor, Ontario, had a daughter. And her daughter loved the B-side. She didn't care about the car crash song. She loved the ballad. She begged her mum to play Beth. So Rosalie gave in. The station began spinning the ballad and the phone lines lit up like a Christmas tree. Suddenly, radio stations across America were flipping the record over. DJs were ignoring the A-side. Detroit Rock City stalled on the charts, but Beth rocketed up. It went gold. It literally saved the album, which was initially underperforming in sales. This created a massive, massive rift in the band. Think about the ego involved here. Paul and Gene were the frontmen. They were the songwriters. They were the leaders. And here was the drummer, the guy they often marginalized, the guy they sometimes treated like a hired gun, holding the trophy for their biggest commercial success. Peter Criss suggests that this resentment is the fuel for the fire that is still burning 50 years later. In his response to the 2026 controversy, Criss explicitly stated that he believes jealousy is the root cause. He thinks Beth is the one mountain Gene Simmons never climbed. He can't claim it, he can't wear it, so he tries to discredit it. The narrative Gene is pushing, that drummers don't write songs, is a direct attack on Peter's credibility. It is an attempt to reframe Beth as a Bob Ezrin creation that Peter just happened to sing. But that ignores the copyright filings, it ignores the royalties, and it ignores the history of Stan Penridge. And that brings us right back to today. Why bring this up now? Why, in January 2026, are we doing this? In his interview, Gene Simmons didn't just say Peter didn't write it. He used specific, almost lawyer-like language. He claimed Peter contributed no musical or copyrightable elements. See, that is a very specific type of insult. In music law, the melody and lyrics are usually what constitute the song. The arrangement, the piano parts, the drum fills, are often considered performance rather than songwriting. Gene is trying to argue that Peter didn't write the melody or the words, implying Stan Penridge wrote the words and Bob Ezrin wrote the music, leaving Peter with nothing but the vocal performance. It is a way to cut him out of the history books on a technicality. Peter's response to Q104.3 was sharp and immediate. He didn't just say Gene was lying, he attacked Gene's authority to speak on the topic at all. By saying Gene wasn't there, Peter is dismantling Gene's status as the band's historian. Criss reiterated that he devised the melody. That is a copyrightable element, folks. If you hum a tune in the shower and that tune becomes a hit, you are a writer. Peter admits he isn't a classically trained composer like Ezrin. He knows he is not Beethoven. But he insists the soul, the melody, and the structure of the song came from him. It is rare to see Peter Criss this vocal. For years he has been relatively quiet, just enjoying his retirement, staying out of the spotlight. But this specific attack on his signature achievement clearly struck a nerve. It is an attempt to rewrite his epitaph, and he isn't letting it slide. So look, the feud over Beth is about way more than just royalties or money. It is about respect. Kiss has always been a band obsessed with its own mythology. Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley have spent decades carefully curating the image of the band, often at the expense of Ace Frehley and Peter Criss. They want to be seen as the masterminds behind everything. But Beth remains the outlier. It is the glitch in the matrix. It is the song that doesn't fit the formula. It is the song that proves the drummer was more than just a guy hitting skins in the back. Gene Simmons may argue until he is blue in the face that Peter Criss had nothing to do with it. But the history books, the credits on the album, and the memories of millions of fans tell a different story. Peter Criss may not have been a musical virtuoso, but he brought the heart to a band that was often accused of having none. But I want to know what you guys think. Is Gene Simmons revealing a hard truth about how the song was actually made? Or is this just 50 years of jealousy bubbling over? Who do you believe? Let us know in the comments below. I read all of them. And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive into rock history, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We have plenty more crazy stories from the golden age of rock coming your way. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.